Well, good morning. It's a privilege to be here. We've been a long-time partner and customer with SmartOps. We're trying to dial it in last night as I was talking to Valerie. We believe about 6 to 7 years as a key partner in our journey. What I'm going to talk to today is the role of demand-driven in our supply chain transformation. And what you'll hear from me is coming not from the lens of a planner or a deployer or a systems architect, but from a lens of a supply chain leader. So if you're an organization perhaps that is challenging with creating a compelling case for change within your organization relative to demand-driven and why it's important, or, for example, if you're having a challenge convincing your C-suite of the value proposition and what it's going to take relative to investments and building capabilities, that's what you'll hear from me. It's through that lens, not necessarily from a planner lens. So my content for about 30 to 35 minutes will be to give you a brief overview of what we call our recipe for growth, so some background on the business imperatives at ConAgra Foods. Our supply chain's role, I'll give you a brief description of our consumer food supply chain and its role and what's important to us in terms of supporting that recipe for growth. I'm going to talk somewhat extensively around our view of our journey of becoming demand-driven. Becoming demand-driven has various different adaptations depending on where you look at it, in consumer products in particular, which is where we spend a lot of time in, but I'll give you our approach and how we're focused on becoming demand-driven. And depending on time, I've got 5 stories or success stories around how some of our teams have taken demand-driven and really drove some meaningful results. And I will wrap up with the benefits we're seeing over the last 4 years in our supply chain journey. So, and then hopefully about 10 minutes roughly for Q&A. So about 2 years ago, we architected a pretty considerable change in our company strategic plan. We call it our recipe for growth. It contains a clear purpose, a set of ambitions that are focused on growth, a blueprint on how we intend to deliver that ambition, as well as some internal, I would say, goals and measurements that I'm not necessarily at liberty to disclose to you today, but I am going to talk about the recipe because it sets the foundation for our supply chain journey and our supply chain strategy. So we have a very clear purpose, very simple purpose, delivering everyday food in extraordinary ways. Our entire organization rallies around this, and again, this is about 2+ years old now. I'll come back to the ambition here in a following slide. Our portfolio now is approaching roughly $14 billion in sales. We're organized in 2 operating segments. Consumer Foods, which is about $9 billion in sales, which is the supply chain I'm responsible for. And then we have a Commercial Foods segment. Within Consumer Foods, we've got really 5 different businesses. Our frozen foods, you'll see several of the brands. 2 recent additions to our frozen portfolio came from a very exciting acquisition of Unilever's multi-serve meal business, Bertolli's and P.F. Chang's. A snacks business, most all warehouse delivered. A center-of-the-store grocery foods business, and then store brands, which we'll go into more here in a second. Given the growth outlook in private label, it is a key growth engine for us. And then we have a 5th business, international, which we'll also talk about, that many of these brands are starting to become global brands. So that is our portfolio and many of our brands. From a consumer foods business standpoint, you heard this in the headline, we are in about 97% of American households. We have about 20 brands now with a recent acquisition that are greater than $100 million in retail sales. Many of our brands hold a number 1 or number 2 category share, leading share position. Our ambition is to become one of the fastest growing food companies by the year 2017, both top and bottom line. And I'm going to share with you 3 specific, I would say, business ambitions or growth ambitions, and then 2, I would say, organization and or culture ambitions that are critically important to our growth. The first is continuing to grow our core business. Obviously, it's a large part of our business right now. However, we are competing in more mature categories, and we also believe that we have the technical right to take our brands and technologies to faster growing adjacent categories in many of our businesses, and that's growth engine number 1. Number 2, is doubling the size of our international business, like most all companies in mostly emerging markets or growing emerging markets, and to do that over the next 5 years. And then the third growth leg is being a more aggressive player in private label, particularly in faster growing categories. Two other ambitions that we are setting our sights on, and that is to become a Fortune 100 best place to work. I'll talk more about the importance of our culture and our engagement model and our leadership expectations to achieve that. And then secondly, to be recognized by Dow Jones Sustainability Index as one of the top 100 award winners. And I'll come back to that here in a second. So that is our ambition, and that's really what, in the last 2 years, we've re-architected our strategic plan. So I'm going to shift gears and talk about our supply chain now. Like many consumer product companies, the way we're organized and the way we define supply chain is in the traditional buy, make, deliver, and customer-facing organizations through integrated planning as well as an integrated end-to-end supply chain strategy. That's the way we're organized: procurement through customer service, integrated planning across it, and then clarity of strategy, which I'll cover here in a second. Some quick dimensions. A fair amount of complexity, which I'll talk about here in a second, in our portfolio. About $3.6 billion worth of buy on our input costs. And you can see the number of suppliers, almost 6,000 suppliers. We do have about 90% of our spend concentrated in strategic suppliers, about 180 of those. From a manufacturing standpoint, we operate 3 manufacturing platforms, we call them. About 40 plants, now 42, with a couple of recent acquisitions. We have about 15,000 engaged production associates in our sites, produce roughly 600 million cases annually. Proud to say that all of our sites are Safe Quality Food, or SQF, Level 2 certified, working on Level 3 as we speak. We operate 2 distribution networks, one in shelf-stable and the other in temperature-controlled, both frozen and refrigerated states. Each of them has roughly 7 mixing centers across geographically our customer base. We're able to reach about 92% of our ACV same-day delivery. 220 transportation providers, and you can see our SKU count and SKU stocking locations, roughly 5 on average for every SKU from a stocking location standpoint. And we do have a centralized customer service, customer-facing organization where we're headquartered in Omaha. And like many food companies, we ship to multiple classes of trade, 14 to be exact. All right? So in total, just over almost $6.5 billion now of total costs. We work hard, and I'll cover this here in a second, on clarity of strategy and deployment of that strategy down to site level. We aim to get roughly 4 to 5% gross productivity out of our supply chain every year. And then I'll talk more about our expectations of culture and the importance of that in our supply chain journey here in a second. I am going to cover integrated planning quite a bit on our journey to become demand-driven, so I'll cover this in more detail in later slides. However, we have been for about 7 years now pretty much a full SAP ERP shop, and we have 2 modules in our EIO by SmartOps as part of our footprint for integrated planning, which we'll talk about here in a second. All right. So we have a very clear purpose, and we stated this purpose about 4 years ago as we started 4 to 5 years ago, roughly, as we started our supply chain transformation work. We have a very simple mission, and that is to fuel the company's growth through productivity primarily and becoming an advantage supply chain. And when we define advantage supply chain, we've chosen those words somewhat carefully. We want to be an advantage supply chain where it has business benefit and high ROI, not necessarily that we need to be world-class or, best in class in everything we do. It will be selective where we believe the business results and the business ROI has the most merit. So when you boil it down, and we've been operating with these 7 strategies for about 4 years now, fairly consistently. We've matured them year to year, modestly, but for the most part, these are the same 7 strategies that we embarked on 4+ years ago. And that is to be strong in the areas of safety and sustainability, uncompromised quality, delivering initiatives, both capital and non-capital, to our sites flawlessly through vertical startups, value-added customer solutions and reliable customer service every day, lowest total delivered costs, and better return on our balance sheet, both fixed as well as working capital. And we do that through the seventh strategy, which we think is the most critically important. You heard Mike talk about it, and that is we expect 15,000 associates to come into work every day with a commitment and an engagement level to drive productivity like no other. We believe in a servant leadership model where our leaders of teams and our leaders of our platforms and or functions are there to make their teams fully self-sufficient, to make decisions and to drive productivity every day. This is our balanced scorecard. We've been operating for about 4 years. So when you take that down to site level, a corresponding scorecard that, let's say, for example, C Crew in Waterloo on line B would have safety, quality, schedule adherence, mean time between failure, maintenance, and also, to some extent, working capital objectives. And we've worked to cascade that through the organization fairly effectively. All right? At the same time, 4 years ago, we made a fairly significant shift in how we thought about productivity. Our previous approach was hundreds of discrete projects, if you will. Buy this widget cheaper, substitute this ingredient, move efficiency on line one from 70% to 75%. Hundreds, some would argue thousands of discrete projects, if you will. Our challenge was those projects weren't necessarily linked to competitive areas of disadvantage. We had a narrow understanding of supply chain losses. Our performance was not sustainable over time. And we were getting roughly 3.5% to 4%, 3 to 4% gross productivity out of our cost structure. And I would also argue a very limited focus on our balance sheet or working capital at that point in time. And also we were very internally focused. There was a reason for that. It was necessary to get the basics right, but we had very little focus on our external partners, suppliers, as well as retailers. So we started to shift our focus to a programmatic approach to build capabilities that were sustainable over time. We selected 6 of those, and I'll cover those here in a second. We broadened our understanding of supply chain loss. We were building capabilities, coaching, and expecting sustainability over time, and we were expecting then, from a productivity standpoint, to generate 5 to 6% gross productivity prior to the impact of inflation, and also starting to turn our attention to having our suppliers as well as retailers connected with us relative to solving their problems and mutually working on supply chain productivity together, if you will. Now, that's where we started our journey 4 years ago, and I'll talk about the capabilities that we laid out. Before I do that, though, this is one of the first steps was fairly extensive benchmarking and understanding what programs or capabilities were needed and why. So we used, I think there were up to 48 different supply chain performance measures. We used internal sources that we had available to us, and in a couple of areas we went deeper with some external consulting, if you will, to help us get started. I'm going to cover them very briefly. Relative to strategy, we were more complex than our competitive set, SKU count, size of our plants, and clearly from a cash conversion cycle or working capital balance sheet standpoint. From a planning standpoint, I'll cover this in more detail. We were laggards. Depending on what maturity model you looked at, demand planning, forecast error, supply planning metrics, inventory metrics, clear laggards. Our sourcing, again, pointed to complexity in our non-finished good recipes, bill of material specifications, number of suppliers we were dealing with. At the root, our core operations were unreliable and operating at low capacity utilization. And from a delivery standpoint, again, we were more complex. We grew up through acquisition, and as a result, our plant manufacturing nodes, as well as our plant-based warehouses and distribution centers were not in the right locations, producing the right product mix. All right? So that's where we started. I would say from a principle standpoint, in addition to the benchmarks, And we stole these 3 words from an individual that I saw write about agile or building supply chain capabilities. And I thought the 3 words qualitatively described what we were attempting to build very well. And that is qualitatively or in principle, becoming a highly reliable, a highly responsive, as well as a resilient supply chain organization. So armed with that, we set off and architected 5 core programs plus an IT strategy that supported it. And at the heart, we believed these 5 programs plus that IT enablement would represent between 60 and 70% of our gross productivity as required by the business, and the balance of the productivity, 30 to 40%, would come from traditional sources, negotiation, buying widgets cheaper, substituting ingredients and such, all right? So I'm not going to go through those all. You can read those. At the heart, I wouldn't say it's one of the core 5, but at the heart of one of our sources of productivity was becoming demand-driven. Our definition of that is quite simply 3 legs or 3 sides to the capability build, and that is, how do we collaborate with suppliers for win-win solutions? How do we build lean into our primarily manufacturing and warehousing operations? And then how do we collaborate with retailers, right? And I'll go into those in much more detail, but our definition of demand-driven is working hard on supplier and retailer collaboration, as well as lean in our plants, lean run strategies, rapid changeover and other capabilities, which I'll cover. And then underpinning this is also continuing to mature our integrated planning. And we'll talk more about that as well. All right. So let me just give you a brief description of what we're trying to accomplish and some of the core attributes of our journey to demand-driven in each of the 3 areas I just mentioned. First is relative to collaboration. We've got a playbook and a set of resources that work to face our top suppliers, as well as our top retailers through joint business planning. Individuals that know how to do it, are skilled at doing it, and have the playbook. We also have architected a set of about a dozen supply chain solutions specifically to helping our customers become more focused around working capital, store level efficiency, as well as supply chain costs in their network. We are investing in demand signal repository or demand sensing technology and use of point of sale data in both our planning as well as working on joint supply chain solutions or efficiencies with our customers. And then also working on scalable capabilities, which I'll come back and talk to. From a lean supply chain standpoint, it is a core element in what we call the ConAgra performance system. So all 42 plants are driving productivity through a common performance system. Our lean supply chain pillar, we call it, is one of the core tenets of doing that. Early in our journey, we partnered with SmartOps on helping get methods on building demand-based run strategies. So batch sizes, patterns, cycles, sequencing of SKUs, line assignment based on heuristics and logic. So we are using PPPO within our house to do that. Working hard at rapid changeover and also other methods, primarily again in our plants as well as in our warehouses. Lastly, we've come a long way in supply chain planning, demand planning, supply network planning long-term, as well as detailed line scheduling and replenishment. However, we've gone from laggard to middle of the pack by all of our benchmark standards, and we've got more value to get. Therefore, we have launched what we're calling Supply Chain Planning 3.0 or 3.0, which is intending to get us to the next level of maturity in demand planning, S&OP, production planning, detailed scheduling, as well as network planning. Also working hard to integrate customer planning into our integrated planning processes internally. And we'll touch more on that. And we are addressing both people as well as process and technology in this effort that we just kicked off. All right? So I'm going to take a little bit of time to cover each of the 3 with some more specific examples. And then during Q&A, hopefully if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them. So in retailer collaboration, Again, it starts with joint business planning. We are bringing the following supply chain solutions, which we have found, and we call this A through J. So as a retailer is challenged with driving revenue, leaning out working capital in their operation, working on supply chain costs or margin within their supply chain topology, and or from a technology or an analytics standpoint, depending on where you're at in the value chain, these are we call it A through J, these are the capabilities that our customer supply chain leaders have the skills and the ability to pull back into our organization to help our retailers solve their supply chain challenges. We are doing this with roughly 20 of our top retailers right now relative to joint business planning. Let's see if I can go back. Yep. So that is our solutions roadmap, as we call it. Now, the challenge is every retailer has a different set of opportunities and challenges. So we are pretty much almost every month finding a new set of opportunities that we maybe don't have the skills or capabilities to go after. And at that point in time, we make the decision whether to invest in that, whether it's important enough to this retailer, or whether or not we just say we can't help you with that. So that's one of the challenges we face. Our lens with our selling organization as well as with our customers has moved from our selling organization focused on net sales or revenue and our customer supply chain organization being focused on operating costs, transportation, warehousing, unsaleables, so on and so forth, to a joint lens of customer profitability. This is a big deal for our organization. Within customer profitability, there are 20 different line items of supply chain expense. Line haul rate, unsaleables, so on and so forth. 20 of those, and we're working hard to drive improvements in customer profitability through lowering cost to serve and by taking these solutions to our retailers. We have reorganized to where our customer-facing supply chain individuals sit within our cross-functional customer teams, and we have right now almost 30 customer annual plans written to where the opportunities in supply chain specific to that retailer are known to us, and the performance expectations from a measurement standpoint and a value proposition standpoint are also very clear to the organization. Lastly, we continue to invest in skills and resources in this area. We find ourselves really focused on extracting transactional customer service resources by becoming more efficient in our order-to-cash transaction processes and reinvesting those resources or headcount into more value-added customer supply chain leadership and analysts. All right? So that's how we're approaching retailer collaboration. From a lean supply chain standpoint, it starts at our sites with 42 sites, about 330 production lines, understanding what it's going to take to have demand-based run strategies for all of those 330 plus lines, all right? And moving from a run to forecast to a replenish to stock model with clearly defined run strategies as configured via block planning in our APO planning suite. All right, so we've been working on that for several years now. In addition, I think one of the opportunities we had, and I think we've seen some breakthroughs, is creating a very strong, compelling business need for why working capital, what's its role in how come we have to take working capital out, and we've made some very strong breakthroughs within our organization down to line level. And I'll give you an example of the simple messaging that we've used and how it fits with our recipe for growth. So most every company has a cost of capital or an inventory carrying cost. We use 15 cents on the dollar between the cost of borrowing, cost of debt, and the expense implications of carrying inventory relative to check pallet expense, storage expense, obsolescence, taxes and insurance, so on and so forth, right? So as we talk to teams around trying to lean out and take inventory out, inventory cost is 15 cents on the dollar. We've just recently announced over the past year 6 different acquisitions. On average, those acquisitions, we committed to the board of directors that we could return on every dollar of revenue about 20 cents, right? So the ROI expectation of those acquisitions was 20 cents. The math between generating 20 cents on the dollar versus losing 15 cents on the dollar is 35 cents for every dollar. So as we talk to planners, warehouse managers, deployers, lean supply chain pillar leaders in our plant level, we make the point that we can get 35 cents on the dollar for every dollar of inventory and reinvest that back in the business for a return. And that gets people pretty motivated. And we'll show you the results on that compelling business need and what we've been able to do. SmartOps has been a key partner in helping us with our run strategy optimization work through modeling scenarios and helping our plants really point to where rapid changeover, sequencing product differently, thinking about batch sizes differently, line assignments differently has been a real win. All sites have a lean supply chain pillar leader and teams are activating against changeover, sanitation time compression, planning horizon optimization, and also material flow through their sites. And then we also operate with a balanced scorecard at a site level. Inventory, service, as well as operating costs are critically important. And we use the terminology within our sites that our balance, it's an and versus an or. We don't make trade-offs. We believe that you can improve service, take inventory out while reducing operating costs. We've got many examples of where we've been able to do that. All right? This is where, as I mentioned, our performance system at a site level contains our lean supply chain pillar. It's a critical skill and methodology, and we have resources that are helping coach and teach the tools in all of our sites. All right, so lastly, the third of the three initiatives under demand driven, and that is our supply chain planning 3.0. As I mentioned, 5 years ago when we looked at many of our metrics, forecast bias, forecast error, forecast value add, mean time between run, inventory days supply relative to finished goods as well as non-finished goods, pretty clear laggards. We've matured to where we've extracted about $150 million of inventory. We've improved forecast error, mean time between run nicely, but we're still, by all of our benchmark standards, kind of middle of the pack. Our goal through 3.0 is to move to top-level planning maturity. We think there's more value to be had. A big shift when we started our APO deployment and our work with SmartOps 6 years ago roughly is we built all of our planning books and we built our planning organization around a plant-centric planning model, including replenishment. We're rethinking that and are moving to planning networks with groups of plants logically grouped to where we can get more value from a replenishment standpoint as well as mid-term, call it medium-term planning horizon out of planning groups of plants as opposed to individual sites. We've been operating a 5-step S&OP process with some degree of success. I would say our gap is our supply review is a soft review at best, and we're looking to mature that as we go into the next level of S&OP, as well as different inputs. I mentioned I think we've gotten a lot of strength and good execution out of our short-term planning horizon, including some work we're doing with demand sensing in the near-end 0 through 14-day demand signal. So our short-term execution has been very, very productive for us. Our week 4 through week 16 planning horizon is where we believe the next level of value in operating costs as well as inventory and predictability of signals to procurement, predictability of signals into space planning in our forward mixing centers as well as our transportation planning organization. So that's our aim in this next go-round of improving maturity. And lastly, we do expect to better integrate customer planning primarily around trade promotion management, lift, and flow of promotional orders through our supply chain as well as into our customer supply chain. And lastly, we have got to get some planner efficiency and planner productivity and eliminate the system workarounds that modestly still exist in our organization. All right? So from a scope standpoint, I'll be happy to answer any questions around this. This is just our blueprint of how we think about integrated supply chain planning. I'm not going to go through this in detail. From a systems architecture standpoint, as we mentioned, we are a full SAP shop, demand planning, supply network planning, production planning, detailed scheduling, transportation load builder, as well as R3 for material management, MRP. In addition, we are using a couple of select partners, SmartOps being one of those, for both MIPO as well as PPPO. as safety stock, AIP, and other inputs. Many of you are using the same thing. And then also we are using Terra technology for demand sensing in that near-term demand plan, demand consumption, to a large benefit to us. So this is the systems architecture that we are going to continue to, that we are re-looking at re-architecting, if you will, in 3.0. All right? So when you put that together, in the 3-4 years that we've been working to mature our demand-driven capabilities, we've seen some very nice, modest, I would say, improvement. Some would argue in some cases some very good breakthrough performance. For purposes of not disclosing specifics, was coached very well by our communications and legal team. So all of these measures are indexed to our baseline. I'd be happy to one-on-one talk to you about what we've seen. If you want to compare benchmarks, we're very open to doing that. But for purposes of transparency, this is the one slide where I've masked our starting point or our absolute performance. What I can tell you on forecast error, we have improved forecast error over the last 4 years by about 30%. Our bias has not improved as much. However, our bias performance in absolute versus the benchmarks we've seen started out to be relatively good. Our mean time between run, we're seeing some very nice improvement. We've really only been working on run frequency as a performance measure down to sight and line level for about 1.5 years right now, but we've seen about a 15% improvement in run frequency. We've seen a very nice improvement. There's a large range of variation, time permitting. I'm going to give you a couple of really nice stories around where we've used rapid changeover, sanitation time compression, and alternative methods to take scheduled downtime losses in our overall equipment effectiveness measures down by, in some cases, 90+%. So our teams are leaning out scheduled downtime losses in our operations very, very nicely. As I mentioned, we've taken about $150 million, or about 20%, out of our working capital over the last 4+ years. And we believe that there is more there, and that forms a large chunk of the business case for continuing on our supply chain demand-driven journey. Retail out of stock at shelf. I had this discussion with a couple of gentlemen last night. We've seen about a 15 to 20% improvement by using point-of-sale data to help our retailers and us. There are brands too. There are brands, but it's also revenue and dollar ring to our retailers. Improve store-level out-of-stock of our brands through various methods, and then our cost to serve has come down nicely as we've improved customer profitability in various areas. So dependent on measure, this improvement to baseline is rough, in some measures 2 years new or old. In some cases, we've been at it for about 4 years. But by and large, very good evidence that as we build capabilities to become more demand-driven, that is sustainable over time, they are having a very meaningful impact in our performance. All right? So wrapping up this demand-driven section is really the role SmartOps has played. I think first and foremost, they were integral in helping us get safety stock and average inventory position, AIP, into our planners, days, if you will. And that was through our SAP and MIPO integration several years ago. They've been a key partner in helping us from a thought leadership standpoint in run strategy optimization across all of our sites. On a periodic basis, they've been very helpful in helping us deepen our understanding of demand and demand uncertainty. And they've been doing that through several what we call ad hoc scenarios or studies to help us understand how to think heuristic or mathematically about supply chain problems. And then lastly, overall, whether it be run strategy in the middle or to a certain extent our retailer collaboration work, they've been a key partner in helping us shape our demand-driven journey. So Martin, thank you to your organization. All right, so I think I've got some time, right, for the stories. All right, let me go through this. All right, I do. I've selected really 5 different stories, and one of the benefits of being a supply chain leader is like Mike, I am less involved in the day-to-day operation, but what is so exciting for me and a privilege for me to see is talking to our teams and seen some of the successes they've been having with many of these methods or many of these tools, bringing them to life, driving real value, and then reapplying those same opportunities in other parts of our organization. I'm going to start with one that I shifted to the top. Is we've got a small group of individuals, call it a COE, that we call supply chain optimization. They have done a very nice job of leveraging MIPO and leveraging PPPO to create long-term roadmaps for driving network modeling. So we have a clear understanding. We've made several decisions to close plants, start up new sites, and or change our warehouse topology and mixing center network. And we do that with this small group, both in terms of understanding operating costs differential, but also the inventory or balance sheet implications. And we use MIPO to model those scenarios very seamlessly, and they've gotten it down to a very, very good routine. In addition, these individuals help coach our sites and run scenarios around their 3-year trajectory on inventory reduction. Every site has got a 3-year lean supply chain plan. Those measures I showed you before, inclusive of expectations to take inventory out while maintaining or improving service as well as operating costs. Every site has 3-year plans. What is a challenge at times is which lines need sanitation work, which lines need rapid changeover work, which lines have the biggest opportunity for mean time between run improvement. Across those 330 lines, this team has done a very nice job of helping our plants and our planning networks understand where the biggest opportunities are. Okay? Here's an example of a real challenge 2 years ago. A competitor left the marketplace in our shelf-stable pudding category. So overnight, our share of the category, we were share leader, went from 68 to 85% share. Immediately in 2 plants, we were out of capacity, could not service the business. Our foundational plant reliability, as well as how we were sequencing through products in that capacity-constrained environment, was very problematic. At the site level, run strategy optimization, rapid changeover optimization. You see, and there's a bunch of other methods relative to lean, but a clear understanding of losses, a clear understanding of what had to change relative to run strategy improvements. And this site had taken turn time, which is in our aseptic pudding terminology, sanitation cycles from 10 hours down to 4. Are coming up now with vertical startups running first hour efficiencies at greater than 95%, improved reliability 20 points, minor stops were reduced by 50%. And you can see we cut our inventory in half while servicing an 85 share and returning to better levels of capacity utilization. So a real good win in terms of revenue, service, zero capital investment, but just lean supply chain and run strategy optimization tools. Similarly, we had a great success going back about 3 years ago, which created another challenge for us. Is we've had great success with our cafe steaming technology platform. This now includes 4 manufacturing lines in 2 sites, line extension growth, and the consumer excitement around this franchise, primarily in Healthy Choice, but also our Marie Callender cafe steamer meals, created complex run strategies as line or SKUs were added to the run cycles. We became capacity constrained, and we were again challenged with balancing labor or operating costs, service, and inventory objectives. Similarly, we've got to earn the technical right through reliability improvement to be able to change over more frequently and run different run cycles. They compressed sanitation time, again focused on first hour efficiency, and then did some really nice work on 2 different levels of planning horizons that allowed us to cycle and sequence SKUs smartly. And as a result, we cut in half or roughly halved our mean time between run. Sanitation time came down nicely, reliability improved, pulled 8 days of inventory out, and created excess capacity to support incremental growth. From a retailer collaboration, I mentioned using point of sale data. I would say we're still learning on how to use it. We have 9 customers live on a tool by RSI, which is Retail Solutions. can't remember the name of the company now, but point of sale data, scanner data. So we have 9 customers live, and in this case, one of our larger retailers was really challenged with out of stocks at shelf for our products. We used the point of sale data nicely to help tackle inventory, phantom inventory, and inaccurate inventory signals through their backroom inventory, as well as not having the algorithm. We've used the algorithm nicely to be able to solve out-of-stock problems, correct many, in this case 60,000 store item combinations. We're using daily alerts to our broker and our retail effectiveness selling teams to go into these stores, make the corrections, and as a result, we've seen about a 3 to 4 point improvement of out-of-stock, recapturing net sales, and being invited by this customer to participate as one of 2 to 3 top supply chain partners to continue to take this across their organization. Another retailer that we're working with as we speak that has, by our view, it is given our visibility, which is only about 8% of their ship-to locations are on vendor-managed inventory with us, which is a capability we offer to our customers. But where we see inventory, this customer's inventory is about 2x their competitive set and a high degree of variability by SKU, right? High residual inventories and obsolescence, primarily around promotional periods. And then we have an opportunity to accelerate or grow our vendor-managed inventory, writing orders and flowing goods more smartly through their supply chain. We are, similarly to what we're doing internally, helping them model inventory targets mathematically, moving to more rapid replenishment, and tightening our event communication and event flow of goods from our supply chain into theirs. And as a result, we've gotten a nice win. However, we still have more opportunities to go in terms of days of supply, reduction in their forward DCs, significantly reducing loose case pick, which was a non-value-added activity from an order quantity standpoint that we recognized in doing the work with them. And they're being very smarter with promotional flow-through into our joint networks. And we are expanding very nicely to probably close to 70% at the end of this fiscal year of us taking over replenishment responsibility for their supply chain. All right? So those are 5 examples of where our teams in demand-driven capability work are helping solve our problems or our opportunity as well as our customers and or our plants. Now, let me just wrap up with 2 slides that we believe are very compelling. This is not necessarily driven all by demand-driven, but many of these results are. And what we have the privilege of continuing to talk to our 15,000 associates about and our business leaders about is the business impact and the value that is coming from transforming our supply chain. I mentioned to you our balanced scorecard when we started. This balanced scorecard has been with us for 4 years roughly. We have reduced safety incidents by 75% in our sites. We were just awarded for 2 consecutive years now the Dow Jones Sustainability Index Top 100, named to the list, and we did not expect to get on the list until 2016, so we were 3 years in advance of where we expected. We have cut in half our quality incident rate. We were named the Safe Quality Food Manufacturer of the Year last year by the SQF Association. Our initiative delivery to our sites is improving nicely relative to time to market and vertical startups. We have continued to deliver, I would say, very reliable core customer service, fill rate, order fill, as well as on-time delivery. And we have moved up from number 14 4 years ago to number 7 in the Kantor supply chain ratings, and that's the customer's view of us as a supply chain partner or a supply chain capability to them. More importantly, relative to our mission of fueling growth through productivity, we have generated on average 5.5% gross productivity for 4 years running, delivered about $1.2 billion of operating cost improvement back to our brands, and pulled about $400 million worth of working capital out of our balance sheet. We expected to take 30 days out of our cash conversion cycle over 5 years, and we are 20 days and counting out of our cash conversion cycle 4 years now running, or cumulatively for 4 years. Importantly, you don't see this on this slide, our employee engagement is continuing to improve every day, every week, every year. As I mentioned, we expect servant leaders, and we expect a highly engaged 100% of our 15,000 associates in contributing this value. A, knowing where they fit, and B, contributing this value and attacking losses every day. And it's been a very nice journey in both our leadership expectations as well as our culture of engagement. All right? So we use this slide, and I'll wrap with this before some key takeaways. Again, I've had to mask this, but this is a real example over the last 2 years, a real example of gross profit for one of our brands. This is gross productivity prior to the impact of inflation. And this is a real example of one of our brands on the compounding effect of working on plant reliability, retailer collaboration, supplier collaboration, smart product design, lean run strategy. In this case, had a 25 roughly average % improvement in gross profit over the last 2 years by the compounding effect of building capabilities that are sustainable over time. And again, why we're doing this is fuel to reinvest that savings or that productivity back into our business to either A, increase our advertising and promotion, marketing support, fund new innovation, maybe not necessarily in this brand, or lastly, to take it to bottom line as operating profit or earnings improvement year over year. So we have choices, but this is a real example of a brand impact that has seen the benefit of what we've been doing. So, wrap with some key takeaways. It's really important that you link the supply chain purpose and what you're doing every day to the business strategy. That has been our messaging, as well as how we've architected our supply chain purpose to the business requirements, has been critical to creating what we call a compelling business need or a compelling case for change. Secondly, I'm 100% convinced that demand-driven is one of probably the top 3 most important elements of our supply chain transformation. It's hard work, it's complicated, but it has been critical to the value proposition that we've been able to get. Mike said this earlier, and I 100% believe it. Our move from hundreds, thousands of discrete projects that weren't sustainable over time to 5 core programs, building skills and methods, making sure they stick and are sustainable is also a critical element. Again, hard to do. Lastly, the focus from our internal focused facing bias to joint planning, investing the resources and doing that also has been a critical element to our success. Then lastly, doing all those things in concert leads to very, very solid levels of productivity. By everything we look at relative to gross productivity, we're operating in areas that are north of our competitive set. And it has had very, very meaningful results to our business, both top line as well as bottom line and balance sheet. All right, so with that, we've got some time for Q&A, I believe.
Questions?
Yes. So the question was relative to our smart ops deployment and integration, how long did it take? I presented at the forum, it was probably 6 years ago, 5 years ago, and I believe it took 9 months to go across our entire business, if I'm not mistaken. Valerie, do you remember? It was roughly 9 months. At this point, it was, I mean, we've grown a little bit, but we've also divested some businesses. So we went across 42 plants and roughly, call it 5,000 SKUs, 27,000 SKU stocking locations, roughly. Maintenance, I mentioned this supply chain optimization COE. It's a small group, 5 or 6 people. They are our subject matter experts for model maintenance, model refreshes, new releases as upgrades. So they handle those, and it's pretty seamless to our users. That core group of COE resources are experts, if you will, in both MIPO and PPPO, and our plants use them. We use for production support, a super user and user network with a small production support team from IT, both on APO and our Smart Ops suite, and that group really are our experts. And I would encourage you to look at that. They do a very nice job. It's behind the scenes work, but it's not a lot of work. Yes.
Next question.
Approximately how large would you say your supply chain strategy group is implementing these programs? How many resources?
That's a great question. How large is our supply chain? So prior to my new role, I ran what we called our strategy group. It was a PMO type of project managers. We architected this strategy with 4 or 5 people. It was a fairly small group at the time. I will tell you, between supplier collaboration, retailer collaboration, our lean supply chain work, our design for preference and value, so all 5 programs, I'll take the IT stuff out of it. I believe we probably invested 50 resources, 50. And we made a conscious choice to, we did this headcount neutral to our entire organization. We were very aggressive at taking transactional resources out of our supply chain in 2 particular organizations, customer service and, to a lesser extent, procure to pay, as we went live with SAP. As we got better at transactional effectiveness, we shifted resources, different resources, but we probably put 50 people almost full time, and we started to peel some of those off, but it was not a small investment. Yes?
Put that in perspective, how many heads do you have in the organization?
15,000. We have about 1,900 salaried professional employees in our supply chain, roughly, and about 15,000 production associates, 14,000 production associates. So 15 in total.
Any other questions? Very well. Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you.